The sitting is resumed. Honourable Member St. Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, I am grateful for the opportunity, sir, to contribute to this debate on the Protection of Wages Bill 2026. So I do so from a perspective that this Barbados Labour Party is indeed a Labour Party, and that we have come to office, sir, to ensure that even as though we transform the economy from the situation in which we inherited it, that we make sure that working people do not suffer as a result of the adjustments that have to be made, but that they are always protected. I want to compliment the Honourable Member for St. Peter for his stewardship in leading the Ministry of Labour and indeed being the flag bearer for most of the improvements in the working conditions that working people in this country have benefited from under this administration. His is a record of stewardship and discipline and making sure that this party and that this parliament does right by working people in the country. So I was in the other place when the Labour Clauses Bill was passed, and I remember a comment being made by an opposition senator at the time, sir, suggesting that the Labour Party was beating itself on the chest for passing legislation to ensure that businesses which contracted with the government of Barbados were doing right by the people of Barbados and the working people of this country, and that there was no such need for the legislation at the time. Little will we know that the circumstances which the country saw last week, in which the Ministry of Labour, led by the Honourable Member for St. Peter, had to intervene to ensure that even those migrant workers in Barbados are deserving of the protection of our laws. There is an underlying philosophy, sir, that governs what we do as a government and what we stand for as a party. Sir, the bill before the House aims to protect employees against non-payment and unlawful deductions of wages. There are many cultural practices that have been on display, and as an attorney at law of over 26 years, sir, a time period that you well associate with, we have seen, sir, many circumstances in which working people have been treated as less than human, have been treated as though they were serfs or servants, or even in very few circumstances as slaves by the persons who employ them. And we have had to come, sir, to Parliament, not only this Barbados Labour Party administration, but other iterations of the Barbados Labour Party, and indeed, in fairness to this House, even the Democratic Labour Party has come on occasions to pass legislation, to amend legislation, to give protection for workers. Sir, I accept that this repeal and replacement of the existing legislation is the right thing to do. And I want to commend the Honourable Member for St. Peter and indeed the team at the Ministry of Labour for bringing this to fruition. This legislation, sir, will establish clear rules for how and when wages are paid in Barbados. It strengthens the enforcement and compliance mechanisms in the existing legislation, and it gives improved access to problem solving and dispute settlement by the Chief Labour Officer and indeed the Employment Rights Tribunal. It is therefore a substantial improvement on the past, or the bill which it seeks to repeal. Sir, there is a contrast that I have drawn when I have examined the methodology employed in the repeal and replacement of this statute. And I told the Honourable Member for St. Peter that I was anxious to join in the debate because sometimes things happen in this Parliament and in this country, sir, without any passing comment. And in the dying days of the last administration in 2017, they sought to repeal and replace a piece of legislation that stood on the statute books that was passed by the Grantley-Adams administration. To repeal and replace a piece of legislation means you take it out completely and entirely and replace it with something brand new. The Democratic Labour Party, when they were in government, sir, sought to repeal and replace the Holidays with Pay Act. And when you look at the bill that they brought to this Parliament in 2017, it was a mere amendment of the existing Holidays with Pay Act, because there was nothing to justify the act being repealed and replaced, because almost all of the substantive provisions of that bill remain the same. Sir, prior to the Democratic Labour Party repeal and replacement of the bill, your entitlement to holidays with pay, you had to have, if it was less than 5 years, it was 3 weeks annual leave. That remained after the 2017 repeal and replace. If it was 5 years or more, the period under Cap 384 was 4 weeks annual leave, and it remained the same after the amendment. Leave may be taken in 2 week periods by agreement between the employer and the employee. That remained the same in the 2017 Act. Employer must give at least 14 days notice of leave, of the leave date. That remained the same. And leave generally to be taken within 6 months of entitlement, that also remained the same. So what we saw, sir, was a Democratic Labour Party in its dying days coming to this august chamber to repeal and replace a piece of legislation that was on the statute books from the 1940s, from the time Grantley-Adams stood on these benches on the other side. Repeal and replace. But that was a dastardly deed done, sir, to erase from the memory, because what they were trying to do was to sever any connection between the Labour Party and the great causes that led to its formation, and to remove the connection between the Labour Party and that legislation. We do not come here to merely tinker with provisions and leaving the entire structure and fundamental apparatus of the Protection of Wages Bill intact, sir. This bill substantially modernizes wage protection in Barbados. And sir, if I were to mark the Honourable Member for St. Peter and what guides the philosophy of this Barbados Labour Party under his stewardship as a Minister of Labour, we have seen the transformation started by Sir Grantley-Adams, the Right Excellent Sir Grantley-Adams, and those early patriots, those national heroes, Sir Hugh Springer, Sir Frank Walker, those great Labour leaders who have stood in this august chamber, sir. In trying times, we have elevated some of them to the status of national hero. But what they were trying to fight, sir, was to fight a plantocracy and a planter class mentality that governed how the law treated working people. We moved from a transition, sir, from master-servant to employee-employer relations by way of contract. This is now a time, sir, for us to continue that momentum. We have no longer treat working people as if they are servants dismissible at pleasure, subject to the whims and fancy of an employer, dismissed on sight without any rights. We have also come to this place, sir, with a fundamental belief that not only the law of contract should govern the relationships, because people have a freedom of contract between themselves. But we have come here, sir, to step in place between the employee and the almighty employer, because the employer always has all of the cards in the pack. All of the aces in the pack are in the hands of the employer, and the employee seeking work sometimes has to take the bitter end of the deal in order to maintain their families. And what we have as lawmakers have recognized, and with the changes in the law, and I want to go into some of the changes in the law, sir, which I believe are pertinent in that transition from moving from a cultural, social-cultural environment of master-servant into the more modern legal dynamic of employee-employer contract to a more advanced situation, which I believe is warranted if we had to really assess this bill, that of workplace justice being the hallmark of the relationship. The law has had to step in, sir, to ensure that workplace justice is the hallmark of the relationship between people who work and those who provide work for them. And I don't want to call them necessarily employers. I know the terminology has been consistently used in the Employment Rights Act, and it has been maintained here. But there are people, sir, who might not necessarily qualify as employees within the meaning of the Employment Rights Act, which meaning survives and is imported in this legislation, that have the right to protection of wages too. Job seekers, people in the gig economy, and all the casual workers, which is the feature, sir, of those persons who are self-employed but who hire out their skill sets, not over a long-term period, but on short-term contractual arrangements with from different employers, sir, at any one time. They can't necessarily be classified as an employee in the classic sense. And that is why I believe that we need, as lawmakers, sir, to be ever vigilant. And I want to say that the Honourable Member for St. Peter has continued a transition, and I hope that this House will ever associate itself with, that we are moving, sir, from an era where we are treating employer-employee as a contractual situation, but a more evolving landscape. And so that evolving landscape is important to gauge and assess because of the transformation, digital transformation, artificial intelligence, robotics, automation. All these things are making fundamental changes in the way in which these relationships between those that are employed and those that provide their work have to be treated, sir. This bill, sir, in my respectful view, provides a platform for the continuation of that trajectory. I say, sir, so against the background against calls even in the United Kingdom right now for the incoming Prime Minister, leading the Labour government, to scrap the amendments to the Employment Rights Act, which was one of the promises, sir, that the Labour Party came into office with in the United Kingdom, promising to beef up. But it seemed that the present administration there was more and more distancing itself from the promises that it had made. We see that even in the United Kingdom, the leader of the opposition is calling for the new Prime Minister to scrap the Employment Rights Act altogether as a means, sir, to spur England into larger growth paths and to resuscitate the British economy. That is the conversation, sir, in the country from whence we have modeled some of our labour legislation in terms of advancing the rights of people. And sir, sometimes it's important for us to keep our eye on these discussions, because the way how the algorithms work in social media, you will soon have people on the call-in programs in Barbados starting to shout from the mountaintops that we need to repeal some of this legislation that is going so heavily in favor of workers in order to get higher levels of growth in the economy. So I'm watching these things because there are trends, sir. We have seen, sir, even in the United Kingdom, a bill that has been before that Parliament dealing with how artificial intelligence is used in the workplace and how it may detract from the existing rights framework in the law, has sat on the order paper in the United Kingdom for the last 3 years, sir. And it is likely, sir, last 2 years, sorry, and it is likely never really to see the light of day. That too will become an important conversation for us. Because if we talk only about protection of wages in a narrow sense, sir, as this world transitions out of the dying stages of capitalism into what we can really accept is a new level of techno-feudalism, in which workers do not necessarily add value to the production process that causes them to have a legitimate demand in any share of the pie. But the pie is distributed according to who owns this digital platform upon which all of us participate. And therefore, the original capitalist model, which is the foundation of the world economy that we have understood for the last 150, 100, 200 years, is now being ushered out. But that, sir, is a discussion for another time. But what I want to move, sir, is to the more fundamental point that the protection of wages and the architecture embodied in this legislation gives Barbados a basis to continue to advocate for decent work standards, and to maintain the protections that have been the hallmark of how the labor capital, the labor development dynamic has been a part of our history for the last 100 years. Sir, there are many areas in which this bill is very strong. The protection of workers and their basic property rights comes through in the bill, sir. And it cannot be pettifogged that for the first time, for example, the wages of workers are to be protected in an insolvency and a bankruptcy. Normally speaking, when a business is going out of business or is having financial challenges and it files for bankruptcy, there are secured creditors like the state, national insurance, VAT. All the creditors have to stand in line and get cents on the dollar. But the secured creditors, those people who might have secured credit lines through some kind of facility, or it might be even written into the articles of incorporation of the business, or put in there by statute, they have to get their money first, and then the other creditors are ranked, what we say in law, in pari passu, according to the rest. What this legislation has done is to say that, look, no, the workers are no longer to get cents on the dollar. Just like how the Barbados Revenue Authority, the National Insurance Security Service, they are entitled to get their money up front before any bankruptcy provision is filed in the court, and then the receivers then try to salvage the business and run it in a way to see how you can pay people 30 cents on the dollar for what they're owed. No. This legislation, sir, says the workers' wages are to be secured, sir. That is a bold step of confidence that the government is putting into the law. And there will come a time, sir, there will come a time when we will have to fend off those persons who are saying, man, look, amend that law. Because it is always those persons in defense of capital who say, take from the workers first. There will come a time when that argument will be made, and I hope that we, as a Labour Party, will continue defend this provision that we are putting into the law. We have to continue to protect workers' basic property rights. Workers are entitled to receive the full benefit of their labor, and the deductions have to be justified, sir. Sir, the 1/3 cap on deductions is also a revolutionary step, a bold step, sir. That is a cap on deductions and recoveries, and it is particularly significant, sir. Where an employee owes money to the employer, the substantial portion of that employee's wages are protected from recovery, sir. The enhanced access to justice. Too many workers had to suffer as a result of the impertinence and indifference of employers. The Honourable member for St. Peter and I were discussing a case in which I was involved in many years ago, in which a lady by the name of Eunice Ramsey had to go to work, and every time she was paid, the Italian financial controller at the hotel wrote her name wrong. And she had hell at the bank getting her check changed. And when she came back to work, there was indifference on the part of management. And after many months of frustration, she uttered what Sir David Simmons, sitting in the Barbados Court of Appeal, said, an indecorous venting of the Barbadian spleen, in which she spoke to the Italian lady. And she was fired because she represented herself using that very indecorous Barbadian language, which you might hear at any shop or fish market, and was fired for it. And the Barbados Court of Appeal, in a decision, sir, that still ranks among one of the most bold decisions and progressive ones written by Sir David Simmons, still stands as a law today, in which that dismissal was overturned in Barbados. Because, as Sir David said, we must judge men by the standards of men and not of angels. That is how the courts have had to deal with rough treatment in relation to how Barbadians were dealt with. And what we have done here, sir, is to create the avenue, as the Honourable Member for St. Peter has said, of the Employment Rights Tribunal having jurisdiction to deal with complaints where wages are being unlawfully deducted and wrongfully deducted or withheld, as we have seen in the recent past. We have included public sector employees because the government does not intend, sir, to raise a standard on how wages are protected in Barbados and leave the public sector workers behind. I have lived through an era, sir, where when my father came home and said to me and my brothers, boys, sweet life done, my salary get cut by 8%. I lived through that. It was restored by the Barbados Labour Party when Alpha came to office. And I remember, sir, every single member of the Democratic Labour Party opposition on this side of the aisle voting against that constitutional amendment. But the good thing was that the people of Barbados gave the Labour Party enough to enshrine it into the Constitution and give it that protection. So that when, between 2013 and 2018, the Democratic Labour Party found themselves in the same trouble as the Erskine Sandiford administration, they were asking the Right Honourable Prime Minister, as the leader of the opposition, to concur in a constitutional amendment that would allow them to cut public workers' salaries again. And Ms. Motley said, no. No. And they had the temerity then, sir, to criticize her for not working in the national interest. That was what was said from the floor of Parliament, that the Barbados Labour Party in opposition was refusing to act in the national interest by agreeing to amend the Constitution so that they can have an assault on the salaries of public workers for the second time in their history. So that is the record. And we have to continue to speak to it. So by putting it and embedding it in this legislation, is the Labour Party's commitment, sir, that government will be held to the same standard as an employer. That working people who work in the public sector have the right to be paid and paid on time. People who are acting in positions on instructions and lawful commands and mandates have to be paid. Temporary workers have to be paid. And too often we hear situations that this is, man, the government ain't paid them. No, sir. It now becomes a ground for a legitimate complaint under the Public Service Act. And it encourages Barbadians who are disadvantaged by the little petty ayatollahs in the public service who are indifferent to giving people who have worked their pay make these claims. And the Labour Party in government, sir, is putting it in the law and giving the right to the people to go after those state actors who might deprive them, because the government can't approbate on the one hand and reprobate, sir. There is also accommodation for people with special needs. This requirement notices be communicated in a manner that can be readily understood by employees with special needs is an important equity provision in the law. This is what a repeal and replacement looks like. Not when you take the infrastructure of the existing bill and reproduce it and say that you're repealing it and replace it so that you want to say that you're associated with something that happened 60, 70, 80 years ago. This is what a repeal and replacement looks like. So the protection of wages bill, sir, therefore can be understood not merely as labor legislation, but part of the broader constitutional and development goals that the government is trying to achieve, sir. It goes beyond the old colonial master-servant relationship, and it really expands that employee-employer dichotomy founded on mutual trust and in the law of contract. It now secures a number of rights and privileges for our working people in the law, sir. Sir, we understand that technological change and the broadening of digital access will provide challenges for how the nature of work and the relationships between the employer and employee are transacted in the future. So the next 5 to 10 years will see a lot of adjustments. Some jobs will be lost because of automation, digital transformation, or artificial intelligence. And I'm hoping that the Labour Department is keeping a keen eye on how this digital transformation and this algorithmic revolution is affecting work. Because if we are talking about protection of wages simplicity and only focusing on the money that is being remitted by the employer to the employee at the contractual turn of payment, then we might be missing the bus, sir. Sir, there was a time when social policy assumed that once you had a job, you got paid your wage, and that wage would give you the opportunity to participate in consumption, and that would lead to economic growth. That was one of the fundamental assumptions for the last 100 years, sir. What we are seeing now, sir, is that it is not only having a job, but the job requires you to have a level of skills and to be able to apply and to deal with the technological challenges and to manipulate technology to create innovation. But what that also does, sir, is to create a level of ownership in the innovation and the innovative skills. That changes the dynamic. That changes your ability to earn income and to retain some of it and to be able to invest it and to lead to prosperity, sir. So that when we look at how work would be distributed across the Barbadian society and economy, there will be some people who will be employed, there will be some people who will be self-employed, there's some people who work on digital platforms, some people who work in the creative industries, the culture industry, into sports, and too many sportsmen still complain that right now they cannot register for national insurance because it still isn't readily accepted as a form of employment. These are things that we have to grapple with, sir. Cooperative enterprises are going to be more and more a feature of the economic landscape of the country. The micro-enterprise, the cottage industry, because innovation is being driven by what? Digital transformation. The state therefore needs to reinforce the policies that protect workers while enabling them to become producers, creators, and content owners and creators. So therefore, sir, I want to, in my conclusion, posit that there's a number of things that we need to do to continue to protect the wages of working people within the Barbadian economy, sir. So the greatest threat from artificial intelligence is not unemployment, it is obsolescence. Artificial intelligence will not cause you to lose your job in a way in which a lot of people fear, sir. It is more likely to cause you in your present job to be obsolete within the working environment, especially if you work in an environment that does not embrace digital transformation. So therefore, every Barbadian, sir, should be given what I consider to be the right to retraining as a right. Because if we're going to protect wages, if we're going to secure the future of your ability to earn in your given trade, profession, or avocation, we are going to have now to focus on that right of retraining as a basic element of your rights package as a worker. This has to include, sir, individual learning accounts. We need to get more of a national AI literacy programs, just as we speak about financial literacy. I know the minister, the Honourable Member for St. James South is big on that, but we need now to start building out AI learning and AI literacy if we are going to protect wages in the way in which this legislation is intended. Because if we want to future-proof Barbados, sir, it is my view that these are the things that we have to do. We are also going to have to start contemplating, sir, training grants for people in the middle of their careers who have anchored themselves in certain areas and certain sectors, have gone and done masters and done training, but they are going to have that flexibility career-wise to be able to adapt. How we fund that is going to allow us to close that technological gap, sir. And we also have to encourage people to jump on board of the National Transformation Initiative. Thousands of Barbadians have already accessed the course content by the National Transformation Initiative. But too many people that I meet, sir, have never heard of it. And this is a program in which the government of Barbados has partnered with Coursera to deliver a number of university-level courses from the top universities in the world to be able to enhance the skill set of Barbadians. This is what the protection of wages in the current environment looks like, outside of the legislative scheme that we are setting up today, sir. We also, sir, have to concentrate on the sectors where human judgment, trust, and creativity remain essential. Because there is a fear that the robots and the computers will take out all of our jobs. But there are certain things that the technology cannot do that still requires a human element, sir. They have not been able to perfect the robot that's going to do nursing or elder care. They have not, Honourable Member said, hairdressing. I'm not sure if I would trust a robot cutting my hair what little I have, because there's such a connection between my scalp and the blade that I might be skinless. So you will still have to have some human intervention. But sir, you know, in the campaign I had two songs, and one was a calypso written by one of our great calypsonians, but the other one was something done on AI. And the truth is that the AI program that the youngster in St. Thomas used, that developed it for me, I had about 18 different genres of music from the Caribbean that I could have chosen. And that is where the technology is. But as I said, the technology is not going to be able to replace human endeavor in all of its facets. And therefore, we have to be able to augment the sectors that cannot completely replace human existence, and think about this. So we have to also, if we are protecting wages in the future, sir, beyond this legislation, we also have to look that one of the greatest risks of automation, sir, is that productivity gain accrues only to the owners of capital. If machines, sir, become more productive while workers own none of the production assets, the level of inequality, that gap will rise. If we do not own the technology platforms on which we are asked to operate on, we are basically replacing the capitalist system with a more feudalistic system where we are paying economic rents. Just like the serfs operating on the Lord's land, where the Lord didn't grow any crops, didn't rear any animals, but was entitled as of right to a share without putting anything into the economic relationship. So that worker ownership has to be the hallmark, sir, of how we continue to protect wages in the future. We also have to build the capacity, sir, for digital and AI sovereignty. These are the topics that I know the Honourable Member for St. James North, as he pushes on with the transformation of Barbados' education system and to modernize it. We are going to have to create the platform for our own people to develop the technologies which we own. Technologies which are generated and developed to fit our needs, rather than consuming a product and having to pay licenses for a product that does not answer our basic requirements. But we have to create digital and AI sovereignty. And the sovereignty, sir, is not only in owning the intellectual property, but having what we consider, sir, the cultural development ability, that psychological will to say this is ours and this is for us to exploit and not anyone else, sir. That is one of the pillars of how we can continue to protect wages. Sir, the final one, sir, is that we need, in an era of fragmented employment, the gig economy, labor law is not going to be able to always respond readily to circumstances that emanate between disputes among people, sir. Eventually, we're going to need to evolve from protecting wages alone to protecting income generally. Protecting income, the way in which the world that we live in is operating, is going to require us to also protect those persons who do not necessarily qualify as employees under the existing legislation, but who are creating value, who are essential components of the economic ecosystem. But we have to be able to find ways to protect their income as a country and as a government in the future, because we can't only respond to what is. We have to see how things are changing, what trajectories offer us opportunities to follow. And therefore, that is why I applaud the Honourable Member for St. James North for the private member's resolution requiring government to look at the portability.
St. George North.
St. James?
St. George North.
St. George North. St. George North, sorry. St. George North for piloting the private member's resolution dealing with the portability of benefits. I said it, sir, in the other place when we were dealing with paternity leave, that we don't have to necessarily, and I see some of the same labor officers here, that we don't have to anchor the paternity leave in terms of how long an employee was working at a particular place, but that those benefits too should also be portable. Because if they're coming out of the employee's pocket, it has nothing to do, in my respectful view, of how long they were at a particular place. Sir, better protection for gig workers, skills training, transition allowances and grants to change midway, things like wage insurance might be options that we have to start looking at, and also targeted basic income rights for those persons in the sectors that are emerging that we have not necessarily all captured in our tax system, sir. So the key principle here is that the state at the very basic level should provide some economic security. I should not merely disappear because the traditional legal mechanisms have not been able to adapt to the circumstances that people present. Protection of wages, sir, is the protection of livelihoods. And therefore, I want to commend the Honourable Member for St. Peter for bringing this progressive legislation, which is a fundamental transition from that which stood before. It deals with a number of the problems that have emerged in this society that have really frustrated workers, but it also gives us a platform on which we can continue this level of economic transformation that has been led so honorably by the member for St. Michael Northeast and the member for Christchurch East Central, sir. I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I definitely promise, sir, on what I promise. But in all seriousness, sir, this debate is not just timely, but it is an important reminder that we, in this 21st century, still have to ensure that the protections that all of us thought were settled, that we need to remind the country that as we continue to move forward, that we cannot let anything slip at all with respect to how our reform efforts are undertaken. So I really want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Peter for his introduction and commit that certainly this government, in exercising and executing both the reforms under the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, that we are committed to not just accountability and transparency, but working with those within the entire ecosystem, sir, to get things right. And over the course of the last few weeks, we have been testing in relation to not just the new systems, but the old systems, to verify that our ability, meaning government's ability, sir, to pay, as well as the private sector's ability to pay, sir, is fundamental. And we have had cause to have conversations with all of the financial institutions in relation to how their data, meaning, sir, you and I as the depositors' data, and how we may transmit that either to Parliament, sir, in your instance, or to Cabinet Office in my instance, or whichever department of government, to ensure that if a financial institution, sir, somehow changes their corporate structure, that the depositor, meaning you or I, sir, should not be disadvantaged. Because you know, sir, that when we open our accounts, we remember our account numbers back in the day. We know what the account numbers are.
That's if you have money on them, I remember.
Well, sir, whether you have money or not, you check and you know your account number. But what we've observed over time is that as financial institutions have merged and done all types of things programmatically, sir, that account numbers, I remember mine very well, sir, I'm not going to call it out, but I know the 6 digits that it was originally. And I'm making this point deliberately because I remember not so long ago, the institution that I bank with added 2 digits ahead of the 6 digits that I know that if I had to rattle it off, I can tell you here and now, to the point when a branch closed, all of my accounts were set up. I'm busy, sir. I was busy trying to get in this place. And all of my payments, sir, that I thought were being executed, then suddenly people calling me saying, well, we ain't see the money. And I raised that specifically because it is embarrassing when you've set up your business to be done in a particular way, and then financial institutions, by virtue of their responsibility and their programming, then don't alert the customers, and certainly then causes inconvenience in relation to these matters. And I raise it in that context because When they added the additional digit now, sir, to make it 9, well, I was in this position then, so I called them and I said, you know, you really must do better than this. I spoke to the central bank, and as you know, sir, we have since introduced the Payments Council. But I raised this, sir, because every month, sir, as I'm paid, I just check my pay slip. I just confirm that what Cabinet Office said is sent to me, sir, that I got. And I received it in my bank. I also check, sir, on those deductions that I asked them to do on my behalf to make sure, sir, that the money goes to where it's supposed to go, because nobody ain't calling me to say, sir, that they may get the money. I do that religiously, sir, every month. And I think that as we move ahead, citizens, employees, employers, in engaging in these financial arrangements, we all must understand what our responsibilities are in relation to exercising this matter. Now, sir, almost 30 years ago, the government introduced something called Smart Stream, which transformed how public servants not just are paid, but the facilitation of payments on behalf of public servants to many institutions were introduced in a much easier fashion, so that rather than people having to run out the place, sir, to pay things, that we were able to facilitate that. And I think, sir, that we must realize a couple of things. And this bill is particularly important, but we need to bring some clarity, sir. You and I both know, sir, all employers, including the government, are supposed to deduct pay as you earn taxes, income taxes, sir, and remit to the Revenue Authority. They're also supposed to remit the national insurance contributions to the National Insurance and Social Security Service, sir, every month. And they do so, sir, as part of their responsibility as an employer, facilitating these payments on behalf of employees to these statutory obligations, so that every year in April, sir, when all employers, government included, load their tax information, that people are able to file and get back the returns or the reverse tax credit or whatever it is that is due to you, which is part of the process. And so I want to make it clear, sir, that those deductions do not form any part of the 1/3 that is referred in the bill, because those are things that everybody is supposed to do as part of keeping order in our society. And therefore, to employers out there, do not entertain any thought of including those statutory obligations. This bill relates to your exposure, quote unquote, with respect to your employees. Government, for example, sir, provides car loans to public officers on the schedule. The government also extends training loans to public officers. So those are two specific loan obligations, sir, that should a public officer engage in, that will form part of the deduction in relation to up to the 1/3 in any given month. And as you would appreciate, sir, math is math is math is maths. So after the employer has deducted your PAYE and your NAS contribution, sir, from your salary, if you have a loan with your employer, and there may be some employers that might provide health insurance, and as part of that health insurance, you're either paying for yourself, or if you're paying for your extended family, your employer will deduct that as part of the obligation that they're providing to you, the employee. And there are a range of other things that employers may offer, for which that 1/3, sir, is important. And therefore, employers, along with employees, in understanding the relationship, the contractual relationship, it means that no employer can deduct from a person's salary more than 1/3 to settle any of the terms and conditions, if you like, sir, in relation to what is extended to an employee. Now, sir, reason I raised the issue of Smart Stream is that over the years we've developed a range of services being paid by employees' behalf, and over time it becomes a expectation that these things should be provided by the employer. The truth is, sir, 30 years ago, these things didn't exist in the way that they exist today. 30 years ago, none of our financial institutions had apps. As a matter of fact, there were no apps available then, sir. Technology has allowed us to be able to bring to real time a lot of the payment infrastructure that part of the reason that some employers chose not to engage in this type of operation is because their account sections and all of that, the reconciliation is important in terms of cash management and all of that, sir. It is much easier today for employers to do so, but it's also easier for people to be able to handle their business, as we would say, sir, in a manner that is befitting to them. And I want to stress, sir, the importance of this bill in emphasizing that the employee, sir, has absolute autonomy and authority, sir, over how they are paid in relation to which financial institution or those types of arrangements that the employer has put in place. And that neither the government, certainly not the Labour Department, nor nobody, sir, really wants to get into your business in relation to who you are paying, sir. And therefore, with the technology that's available today, no employer needs to get into the business of any employee specifically. And certainly want to express that the government is not interested, sir, in getting into anybody's business in relation to these matters. Because there are some people who will try to say that the government, as you know, during the pandemic, sir, the government was trying to do all types of things with people and trying to get people on blockchain and all of these types of things to track people and all of that kind of thing, sir. The government is not in that business, sir. We are here to facilitate and to help our employees settle whatever they need to settle in a way that makes sense. But it is also important, sir, for people to realize that sometimes you have to take responsibility for dealing with your business. And therefore, a few weeks ago, I was advised, sir, that when we had a little glitch, because I remember seeing the $0.01, and just to be clear, sir, about a month ago, there was a test where $0.01 was deposited into everybody's account, sir, to make sure that when we did the transition, sir, that all the account information that would have been supplied by employees to the employer was correct. Cognizant that some of the institutions had made some changes with respect to their banking accounts, and because the technology is unforgiving, sir, you had to make sure that there was a level of precision in relation to what information was already in the systems to do the testing. When they did the testing, they were found that there were a number of financial institutions that needed to provide updated information to their clients, meaning employees, in order to ensure that what information is being used by the payroll systems of employers was consistent with allowing people to be paid. I saw my $0.01, sir, and I was happy that I was going to be able to be paid seamlessly when we made the transition. Because if you don't track these things, sir, and I know that people are going about their business as they should, without having to worry about these things, and that's why it's important, sir, that in our case, it's Treasury and the financial controllers of each government department, whose responsibility it is really to interface with employees to make sure that any information that is required to be updated is updated on time. And we've gone through a process, sir, to settle that, and that should be put to rest so that by next payday, sir, everything should be seamless and in place in relation to paying people on time. And I think it is important to recognize that as things transition, we are working in an ecosystem, and if there is a blockage in the way that the information is being transmitted, sir, then it creates a problem. And I must thank the team at the Treasury, working with the rest of the financial controllers in the various departments where we had some specific issues. And I also want to thank the financial institutions, the banks and the credit unions, for addressing what was effectively their problem, sir, their problem with respect to their data standards, and allowing us to be able to ensure that people are paid on time. And so there's the technical side, and I heard the contribution from my very long time friend from St. George North, and the concerns she raised in relation to people trying to wait to the last minute, sir, to pay people, and going into the weekend and bank holidays and those types of things. Having delivered, sir, a real-time payment rail, those matters will be a thing of the past, because all payments now are delivered in real time, and therefore once an employer, in this instance, presses send, it will be delivered so long as they've got money in the account that's coming from. So that's to be clear, money has to be in the account, sir, in order to be paid. And that's a different issue. So if there's no money in the account, then you can't get paid, but the rail is there, the infrastructure is there to ensure that once an employer in executing their payroll hits send, the bank will then disburse the monies into the accounts of all of their employees in real time, and therefore some of the issues and concerns that people experienced in the past, sir, will no longer be the issue. But I want to address a particular matter, sir, because the Treasury, over the course of the last week or so, has had to suspend some salary deduction authorizations from some institutions. And there's very good reason for that, sir. And I want to say categorically, sir, that the government of Barbados is not intended in any way, sir, to stop anybody from getting credit. We are not about to shut down nobody's business or anything of that nature, sir. But this debate is particularly timely because some of the institutions were presenting documents, sir, that would effectively bind the state for settling debt that they have entered into with an employee. And therefore, we had to pause in relation to that facilitation, because whilst an employee, sir, can say to any government department or any government institution, I want to pay the speaker $100 every month, and we will facilitate paying the speaker $100 every month. If I am no longer, sir, employed, in this instance, let's say a cabinet officer, in that instance, cabinet office can't continue paying you, sir, if I'm no longer in the cabinet office. And therefore, we had to be very clear and sure-footed in relation to what was being presented to us as obligations in relation to employers settling what is effectively debt, sir, in relation to some of these arrangements. And this is important because in the context of protecting wages, and I'll come to that in a little bit, if it is, sir, that I am no longer in the employ of the government, some of these forms were intimating, sir, that any monies that was due or owing to me, and I know that there's a section here that deals with that, any monies that are due and owing to me, they wanted, sir, some of them wanted in this case, what would be the government, to settle with them in full, which cannot be right by any stretch of the imagination, because as you would appreciate, sir, that, or clause 18, as you would appreciate, sir, people have the right to determine how they spend their money. And therefore, it is within that context that we had to say pause in relation to some of the documentation that was coming to the government in relation to this. And at the end of the day, sir, as you and I both know, people, living arrangements change, and from time to time, people will make their arrangements in relation to how they will settle certain things. And therefore, it is that specific obligation that was being foisted, if you like, sir, or an attempt to foist on government, that we had to pause on these forms, cognizant that this bill was coming, to be clear as to what we will communicate to our staff in relation to what government would facilitate. Government can and will facilitate any payment that people want us to make on their behalf. But the government cannot, sir, under any circumstances, provide any guarantee to any lending institution in relation to what has been extended to an employee. And therefore, it is within that context that we want to make clear that government's ability to facilitate the assignment of wages, or any employer for that matter, providing such a service cannot be held liable, sir, in relation to guaranteeing that you will be paid ahead of anybody else under any circumstance. And this is important because when people go to some institutions, and they may like the fact that they might get a quick response. And getting a quick response is okay, but if the quick response comes at a significant cost, sir, where in some instances, sir, the interest rate is 28%, some is 35%, some is 40%, sir, which, when you look at the data, as I said, sir, the government is not in the business of telling people how to spend their money. But as a responsible employer, in seeing some of these things, then that is where the employee assistance programs and stuff will come in, sir, because whilst the institution may be asking for a salary deduction in relation to being able to give you a loan, that effectively, sir, acts as almost as a guarantee, because as long as you're employed, sir, with the institution, they know that they will get the money out so long as you're employed. And therefore, that in of itself is fine, but the lending institution cannot place an obligation, sir, on the employer, cannot place an obligation on the employer to settle any outstanding debt, sir, if the person is no longer in your employ. And I want to make that abundantly clear, sir, certainly on the government's behalf. And I would think that employers across the country will have such conversations with the employee, sir, in relation to the nature of these things. But we speak about protection of wages, sir. And I want to say to Barbadians that short-term financing, if not, well, short-term financing done inappropriately will lead to an erosion, sir, of the very wages that we are seeking to protect here. Because the interest costs could be such, sir, that your swiftness is fine, sir, but you have to make sure that you can manage these payments in a manner that still allows you to be able to live your life. And therefore, I don't want to label any of the entities that were published, but the reality is this is something that as a government, and I think as a responsible employer, we can only advise and provide financial education, if you like, sir, for persons that may find themselves in that particular space, so that they understand that by doing this could, in effect, sir, mean that you are utilizing more of your money in interest to settle these things, rather than having a proper credit arrangement, which I believe will suit the finances in a much better way. And I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can, sir, because, as I said, sir, the government is not in the business of telling people how to spend their money. But when we see the types of interest rates being charged, we have to say pause and consider the impact that that may very well have on the finances of the employee. And you and I both know, sir, that under the public service rules, one of the conditions for which persons can be dismissed is if you become bankrupt. Sir, you know this. And therefore, by the nature of seeing these things, you can get concerned. And therefore, one of the things that we will be working with the Ministry of Public Service is to make sure that we can introduce some level of financial counseling, sir, which I hope, sir, that people will be prepared to take, because I believe that in the environment within which we are operating, we have to give people the best opportunity to be able to get their house in order, in the same way that in 2018 and 19, myself and the honourable member here from St. Michael South Central, along with the Prime Minister and the rest of the team, we put the country in a position, sir, to be able to resolve these very weighty matters, because we just didn't have any money to do very basic things which the country saw. And we don't want that kind of thing happening in the public service, far less the country, because it is important that the financial strength of individual public servants, sir, that we are not compromised, that they are not compromised, and therefore we have to work to find solutions to this particular matter. And so this context of protection of wages is important, because if people are making decisions that they believe, back to school coming up, you want a little quick money to do some stuff, but the interest on that back to school loan might be, don't get me wrong, sir, creditors are in the business of making money. And that it is a legitimate business. But if the interest rate is such that it becomes unbearable, then too much of this type of thing is problematic. And I can only caution people that there's only so much that you can take on in relation to this type of credit before you could find yourself in a little bit of trouble, sir. And I think we have to be responsible as an employer, and to put some measures in place to be able to educate more of our citizens. I know the Financial Literacy Bureau has been doing some of the work, but I think specifically we're going to have to make sure that we put something in place with MPS to be able to help deal with some of these issues. But this bill is important that the language that it uses is that an employer may, sir. And I think that we have sufficient technology, sir. And as I tell you, sir, even though we got technology, I just check, because I don't want no extra interest. I don't want no extra nothing when something go a day late, sir, because a day late means, sir, there's an extra $2 or $3 or $4, depending on the thing, sir. And all of those little pieces of money, sir, add up over time. And if anybody here knows me,
and everybody here knows that.
It matters, sir. It really does matter over time. And therefore, that basic discipline, I believe, is important that people exercise. We have scheduled payments in all of the banking apps now, sir. And so even if persons are concerned that if they get the money, that they can spend it. And I've heard tales, sir, of a few weeks ago when we had we did have an issue where people were paid in full minus the assignments that they had asked the Treasury to do. And I've heard tales of people spending all the money as opposed to paying the regular commitments that they normally would have Treasury pay. Personally, sir, that's a little disappointing to me, because at the end of the day, when we come to overpayment, which, again, sir, that would never happen to me, because if I see too much money in my account, first thing I call and say, where to send it back, because I don't even want to contemplate, sir. I don't even want to contemplate anybody saying, Huh? I don't even want to contemplate, sir, any arrangement of paying back over the. So when the Honourable Member for St. George North talking about the length of time, me, sir, for me is the next day. Where to send back this money? Because I know what I work for, sir. I check to make sure I've paid what I am due. And I don't make that kind of sport, sir. So I just saying, if you're overpaid, it is in your interest to make sure that those monies go back so that no issues will arise later with saying, well, I pay you back or you don't pay me back yet, and this kind of thing, sir. You know that I don't make sport, sir, when it comes to this kind of thing. You need some basic discipline in here to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. Because at the end of the day, sir, you and I both know that when you work, you expect to be paid, as all of us do. And therefore, if you get a little something extra, you call and ask, well, what is money for? And sir, I am very particular and very precise, because these things really do matter in relation to, one, as an employer, you would like to know that you can trust employees, because things will happen, sir. And I think to the extent that things may happen from time to time, there has to be a responsibility on both sides, as the employer as well as the employee, to ensure then that these things, as they arise, sir, that they can be settled amicably and that there's no big set of confusion about these matters. And I think if people, both employers and employees, meet in the middle and agree what will happen if and when something clearly happens, then I think that the not just the industrial relations climate, but I think the trust between employees and employers will be enhanced. But it does come down, sir, to having a level of discipline in relation to how these things are treated. Now, I accept, sir, that over the course of the last 30-odd years, with the implementation of SmartStream and the ability for us to assist people in solving their credit issues on time, that has contributed to good credit quality for a number of Barbadians. And I think that is a positive thing that employers can assist their employees with, because I think the extent to which people would want to lend to government officers, for example, is because of the ability for people to get their deductions paid to them. But we have to be clear, sir, that the ability to facilitate that, whether it's government or the private sector, should not be seen as the employer guaranteeing any single institution that they will be repaid, because I cannot guarantee that this person will always be my employee. And therefore, that is something that I believe is fundamental, sir, that we need to get clear, so that anybody who's providing credit, sir, does not try to use employers as the guarantee with respect to the credit provisioning. Because at the end of the day, sir, if you know, sir, that I run it from bank to bank all down Broad Street looking for money, and I come to you, sir, and you lend me the few dollars, then you know that you're lending me the few dollars, sir, knowing that my credit quality is not good. So even though I may be employed, I owe the whole of Barbados. And by owing the whole of Barbados, sir, you accept that if I don't pay you back at the time that I told you we can pay you back Friday, sir, and when Friday comes, sir, you're looking at you, you're looking at me, and I'm looking at you, and you're looking at me, sir, then I know where things are going to end up. And therefore...
You're right, in court.
In court. The court is still there, sir. The court is still there for persons to be able to get their monies. But I think it is important still that whilst employers would facilitate the payments of credits and these types of things, sir, as we have been facilitating, the technology exists today that allows people, knowing that payday is on the 25th, sir, so you can set up all your payments on your phone, sir, that on the 25th, as the money comes in real time, it goes out at the same time. And therefore, whilst I accept that people may have the ability to change things on their phone, which is fine, because as I said, sir, this piece of legislation stresses the importance of the employee, sir, to have control over where their monies go. And no credit agency can place an obligation in relation to that matter. And therefore, it is important, sir, that we continue to stress and work with everybody in the ecosystem to ensure that it happens. Now, here's where I feel, sir, more education on the credit bureau needs to be rolled out for people so that the people who are lending, which some of them already report into the credit bureau, some don't. And therefore, it is important as a clearinghouse in relation to the extension of credit and doing business that that data and information is accessible only, obviously, to persons. If I come to you for a piece of change, sir, I give you tacit permission to go and inquire on my behalf at the credit bureau to see whether or not you can lend me the money. And that is your right to do, because if you're going to extend the credit to me, sir, you want to check to see that I am up to date with all of my other payments thing. If you choose not to avail yourself of that, sir, and you still want to lend me the money, then you know, sir, that you're doing it at your own risk. And then that's where you go end up in court potentially if something goes awry. And therefore, I think it is important that we engage in much more robust education on these matters with our employees. As I said, we'll work with the Ministry of Public Service to put the financial assistance program, not to give people money, this is advice and counseling about what to do in relation to solving some of these issues, because things happen from time to time, sir. I know someone who lost 3 family members within a 9-month period, sir, and therefore financially that clearly is something that is a shock, and therefore needed to have some counseling and intervention to allow them to be able to get through that particular challenge. And therefore, public servants are no different to anybody else in the rest of society, but we do not want people feeling as if there is no option available to them when things happen. And therefore, it is important that as we have a framework that allows people to come in and without, as I said, without any recriminations or anything, to be able to help get them through their financial stress such that they can continue to provide the kind of service that they need. And so, sir, I think this bill is important. I promise to be short. I have been short, sir, and I hope and I hope that the rest of my colleagues, sir, in contribution to this debate, I know we will bring our different perspectives, but this is fundamental, sir, to how Barbadians will be able to engage in the workforce in this 21st century. And I think with the technology that we have available, with the systems that we will put in place, sir, then I'm confident that the minister and his team will be able to not just monitor and evaluate what's happening in workplaces, but I hope, sir, that with the robust financial education that I think we need to ramp up across the system, that this will mean that Barbadians will actually have better financial management of their resources, and in so doing, being able then to unlock additional opportunities for credit to improve their lives and livelihoods in relation to these matters. So I'm very supportive of this bill, and I hope, sir, that with the education to come, that people will avail themselves of it to help us to be able to avoid any pitfalls in the future. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lend my voice and contribution to this very important bill, particularly where we are with respect to a series of transformations that we are undertaking as a government in Barbados. And certainly, I'm proud also to be part of not just a government, but a party that at its core and through its own name is rooted in the principles of labor. And a party started by one of our national heroes, right, excellent Grantley Herbert Adams, who not only championed the cause of labor in Barbados at a time when there was significant challenges with respect to the quality of life in Barbados, and more importantly, brought legislation to this Parliament to ensure that the quality of life and the issues surrounding labor came into modern times, and therefore we find ourselves today as part of a government anchored in the philosophy of ensuring that we can create a better life for our people. And throughout the years, as you've heard, Mr. Speaker, this chamber has had to confront, through the passage of legislation, a number of challenges, not just on a domestic level, but of course, when you look at what is happening globally throughout the world, there continues and had continued to be a number of challenges which workers must confront, and therefore part of the remit of this chamber, and certainly Barbados, has been and will continue to be to ensure that we provide that strong arm of the law to make sure that workers' rights are advanced and at the same time protected. And I want to very, very briefly, Mr. Speaker, also use the occasion to unequivocally commend my colleague, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, who has not only brought this bill to Parliament today, but he has also done so with distinction. And Mr. Speaker, I started by saying and paying homage to Grantley Adams. But as you've always heard, or at least as you've heard today and in other fora, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, notwithstanding his humility and notwithstanding that he will not trump his own accomplishments, we ought to feel a sense of immense pride as Barbadians today, and certainly those in this House. Because even before this bill has come today, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for St. Peter has brought a suite of legislation, bills passed into legislation into this chamber, which have advanced the cause of labour in Barbados. And I want to publicly commend him for what he's been able to do. And I cast my mind back to when I was serving in Geneva as ambassador, and the centenary, the 100th anniversary of the International Labour Organization, the oldest organization, international organization within the UN system, actually even older than the establishment of the United Nations itself. And at that centenary, the Honourable Member for St. Peter was part of a very select group of persons in labour across the world, comprising, of course, of governments, capital, and workers, working to ensure that at the turn of the 100th anniversary of the ILO, what we now call C-190, focusing on violence and harassment. And it was a major celebration because why? The world, therefore, through the ILO mechanism, settled on a position that there can be no place for violence and harassment in the workplace. But as fate would have it, just a few weeks ago, at the just concluded International Labour Conference at the ILO, not only the Honourable Member for St. Peter, but the Honourable Member for St. George North, they were both part of a team who anchored Barbados' contribution in the ILO in ensuring that as the world continues to grapple with new modes of work, particularly in the context of the platform economy, that Barbados was able to shape, I repeat, Barbados as a nation through its contribution from the Honourable Member for St. Peter and the Honourable Member for St. George North, were able to shape global conventions through what we now have as Convention 193, focusing on the platform economy. And I start there deliberately so as to not just contextualize, but for us to understand as a nation and certainly as a chamber, not only the importance of this bill before us, but helping those listening to realize the importance of this administration and the importance that we place on ensuring that we can advance the rights and protection of our workers. And of course, this bill before us is anchored in the conventions of Convention 95 in the ILO and Convention 173. And as you've heard, Mr. Speaker, in a previous time in Parliament, yes, we had the current legislation, which was later amended in 1975. But part and parcel of the role of Parliament certainly has to be, and is, ensuring that there's a modernization of pieces of legislation so as to reflect the changing tide in the world. And why I'm so happy to associate myself with this bill is that when you look at where we are in the world, there are a number of significant global challenges, certainly Barbados and the Caribbean, that we've had to confront. Issues, of course, of growth, issues of development, balancing the books, navigating inflation, all the different things. And yes, this administration has, and proudly so, and humbly so, been able to chart us through some very, very difficult economic waters, and we've now seen consecutive quarters of growth. But notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, whilst the economy is growing, whilst there's growth, whilst foreign investors are coming, whilst domestic business persons are opening new businesses and things are thriving, that can only be truly successful if at the very core we ensure that those persons who drive these businesses, the workers, have the protection that is necessary. And therefore this modernization through the bill before us today, to my mind, represents part of the arsenal in which we are advancing in that protection of our people. And I cast my mind back to when I was in a previous role, serving as senior advisor to the Director General of the International Labour Organization, just about over 2 years ago. And one of the things that, when you look at the decent work agenda, which looks at, of course, wages and social protection, and ensuring not only that workers have jobs, not only that they should have quality jobs, but fundamentally at its core, how do you ensure that those jobs provide a decent wage and decent life for the worker? And this bill before Parliament today allows for us to send a very clear message domestically, to send a very clear message regionally, and an even stronger message globally that this Parliament and this country is very serious about ensuring that the workers and their rights through the protection of their wages is non-negotiable. And therefore, I cast my mind back to when I would have traveled the world in different fora with the Director General. And as the Honourable Member for St. Peter and the Honourable Member for St. George North would know, as part of the travel when you go to different jurisdictions with the Director General, Mr. Speaker, you meet with the governments, you meet with the employers, you meet with the workers. And there were a number of countries, which of course I will not call, but there were a number of countries which, when you were meeting with them sectorally, were not up to par in terms of where they needed to be with the protection of workers and their wages. And many a time that caused significant debate. It caused significant, not just debate, but there was significant tension with respect to what was happening. And we therefore had to be able to use the Global Good Office of the DG to be able to make clear the intent of the convention and to hold employers, and in some instances governments, accountable to ensure that they respected the spirit of what the ILO had passed. And therefore what we must now do is to also reiterate and to make clear that the protection of the wages of workers in Barbados must not and cannot be compromised in any way, shape, or form. And I want to focus very briefly on 3 areas. When you look at, first, the area in this section 17, focusing on the employee being treated as a creditor in circumstances where there may be insolvency or bankruptcy, this continues to be one area of the bill that the country must really focus on and also be proud of that it is here. Why is that? Without workers, Mr. Speaker, companies and businesses cannot succeed. They're the ones who come to work, they give their all, they use their ideas, they give their creativity, they give everything so as to ensure that the company can not only do business, but make their profit. And for whatever reason, a company may become insolvent or may become bankrupt. But therefore, you must also ensure that there's that level of protection for them, that in circumstances where there's insolvency or bankruptcy, they're not left holding the bag and an empty bag at that. And this, therefore, allows for them to be seen within the lineup of persons who must now and be able to get what is rightfully theirs, having made the contribution when the business was in operation. And when you look at what it does, it gives not only dignity, but using that principle, of course, in law, it gives certainty to the worker in these types of circumstances. But I also want to commend the inclusion of Section 19, which focuses, and rightfully so, on the inclusion of ensuring that employees with special needs receive notifications, Mr. Speaker, as required by the Act, in a method of communication that allows for them to both receive and to understand the notice. And why is this important? It is one thing to receive a notice, but if you receive it at a location or a place where it's not accessible to you, but there's a place in which would be better suited for you, that is something, therefore, that the section contemplates. And in addition, it also contemplates and makes clear that it must also be done in a manner in which you can understand. We all know, Mr. Speaker, there are varying degrees and categories, of course, of persons with special needs, and the legislation, therefore, or the bill, contemplates that it will ensure, particularly bearing in mind that we also have, as part of this Parliament, legislation treating to the disabled community. And therefore, it serves as a complementary piece to ensure that they have all of the things necessary to make their life easier. Because part of the decent work agenda isn't only in what we may think. Persons within the disabled community are part of the economy. And therefore, what the government is doing with this legislation is making sure that, as you've heard in many debates, many estimates, many budget, that inclusive growth is therefore not something just as a concept, but must be now a lived reality, making sure that all persons who want to participate in our economy have their rights enshrined and protected. And when you look at the issue of what we see in Section 25(2), I'm happy, and of course it took a while throughout the years, but I'm happy to have seen the inclusion of an increase of fees, moving from, I think, the Honourable Member for St. Peter can correct me, I think $48 or so, yep, I'm 96, to up to now $30,000 or 3 years imprisonment for any employer who believes, Mr. Speaker, and ill-advised of course, but who believes that they can take out deductions from workers are not, as we know, paid in. That message has to be sent clear, and I want to use this platform to say to all employers, all businesses, large or small or medium, if you take out deduction from workers, do the right thing and pay in the deduction that you took from the workers. Because why? You're playing with their livelihoods. There's a reason why it is there. And if you are taking it out, you must ensure that it is not put to other use. And this, therefore, to my mind, this part of the bill brings us into the 21st century, and across the Caribbean, across the hemisphere, Latin America and Caribbean, across Europe, across Africa, across the Arab regions, this continues to be one of the things that serves as a major piece, giving spirit, as I said, to the convention, which would have framed this bill and the previous legislation that we are about to change and bring this into effect. And never must we believe that you take out deductions from workers' salary and not pay it in. It cannot be tolerated, and the message must continue to be sent. And therefore, whether workers from my constituency in Roadview and Sion Hill and Weston and Garden, Bakers, the Wim, Ashton, those workers can feel a sense of confidence, Mr. Speaker, that this bill provides them that certainty and safety in moving forward. But for those who may be in doubt, one of the things that I recall in preparing for this debate is that there's also a self-paced course that anybody can go onto the International Labour Organization's website, Mr. Speaker, that if they're in any doubt as to, first of all, what is the issue of wage protection and how can you ensure that your company is in compliance with it, or you as a worker may not know exactly how to go about certain things, the International Labour Organization on its platforms has a portal which allows for anybody to go and do a self-paced course to understand the rudiments of wage protection. And I want to encourage everybody to be able to tap into that, because why? Oftentimes it's not just about what is in the realm of Parliament, but we must also ensure that the public, the ordinary man, as it were, have the tools to be able to understand the modalities of what we're discussing here and the conventions that are passed in their name at the global level. But the issue of labour standards, as you've heard the Honourable Member for St. Peter treat to quite rightly, is one that this Parliament and the country must not take its eye off of. And I want to commend the government and also the union for being able to treat to a number of issues that have raised their head in recent times that makes it very clear that Barbados is a jurisdiction that will take labour and international labour standards very, very seriously. Because yes, of course, Barbados is open for business, both to domestic business persons and international business persons. But irrespective of where you find yourself as a business, the message has to be clear that it is non-negotiable for us as a jurisdiction, as a country, particularly as a country on the eve, and I repeat, a country on the eve of its 60th year of independence, a sovereign nation, 5 years as a republic, and there must be no doubt in anybody's mind where Barbados stands. And I'm proud to be part of a government that makes it clear and will continue to make it clear that the protection of workers' rights is a non-negotiable thing. And when you look at also the broader picture now, the issue of the changing labour market, we have to prepare this country, not just the young people, but of course, they're the ones who will stand to benefit more over the course of the years. But we have a duty to prepare the labor market, Mr. Speaker, for a world that continues and will continue to change at pace. And two things are ever before my mind, particularly as Minister with responsibility for education transformation. How do we prepare the students of today for not only a job market, but a business market that will require them to have new skills that you and I, Mr. Speaker, and those in this chamber did not have to have, given the rapid pace at which the global job market and business market are changing. But two, and importantly, preparing them for a world in which the skills necessary for the future and the jobs necessary for the future are not created as yet, but that notwithstanding must have the mindset and the attitudes and the values to be able to navigate these complex realities going forward. We live in an age where, Mr. Speaker, it's no longer certainly only about certification, but the nexus between your knowledge and the use of technology, whether it be for the efficiency of a business or understanding the modes of production, which are more and more being anchored now by technology and, of course, in the advent of artificial intelligence. The skills necessary, therefore, for this generation of young Barbadians must now come to the fore in a way that we've never had to contemplate before. And part of and parcel, therefore, of education transformation is to be able to, one, give our students that confidence to move into this new reality at pace and at scale. And secondly, and importantly, to be able to also, as the Honourable Member for St. Thomas rightly said, to have the confidence to also export the ideas and tools that the means of production globally will use to move the global economy and certainly Barbados' economy forward. And I want to use this occasion, and yes, we've had the informal discussions, but I think an opportunity is here for labor and education to work even closer together in ensuring that our young people and our people broadly have the skills to be able to prepare for that future economy. As I said, anchored in understanding the decent work agenda. And when you look at the 2030 agenda, which is part and parcel of that decent work agenda, ensuring that we can attain the broad goals as outlined by the United Nations, Mr. Speaker, must now become part and parcel of the understanding of our people. And that is why through the transformation, and in particular the curriculum reform that we are presenting to the country, is to also help young Barbadians to be able to navigate that space. It is not only about learning the geography and the mathematics and all these things. It is also the application of these things to help them to realize that in order for them to understand how the world works at a global level, we must give them the tools even before they leave school to be able to navigate that space. And therefore, I want to once again commend the Honourable Member for St. Peter, his team, having the foresight to be able to bring this bill at a time when there continues to be significant global complexities that we must navigate as a country. And therefore, when you place that with the responsibility of this Parliament and certainly this administration in being to unequivocally say that workers and workers' rights and the protection of their wages, particularly when you look at a mother or a father or a family having to support their family, pay their bills, send their children to school. We cannot afford for them not to be protected in a way that brings dignity and certainty to their life and to their realities. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to once again unreservedly associate myself with this bill, and I thank you very much.
Honourable Member for Jamaica South Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be short, perhaps unlike others who threaten and do not comply. Sir, I could not let this debate pass without being able to associate myself with this important piece of legislation. I often say in this honourable place that the work that this government does to enable Barbadians and those who live here and those who might come to live here in the future, the work that we do to enable people to live their choices fully cannot be taken in isolation. And I listened carefully to the Honourable Member who led the debate, the Honourable Member for St. Peter, as he took us on a journey through the series of actions of Barbados Labour Party administrations and government who saw and felt and gave life to the experience of workers in this country. But it is not just the historical context that I want to highlight from the outset. I always talk about how government is engaged in bringing a suite of legislation that is mutually supportive. Very recently, the member for Christchurch East Central brought legislation related to the protection of depositors. And of course, depositors are those who earn wages. The others who spoke before me made reference to other pieces of labor legislation the Honourable Member for St. Peter has brought, and those who sat in that seat before him in a Barbados Labour Party government have also brought. But we've also heard in this debate, and I also wish to call this chamber's attention to another recent debate that was the subject of a private member's resolution related to the portability of benefits and the extent to which these all hang and work together. But I go further. Recent reforms to the National Insurance Scheme and its governance and the way it functions were also effected in order to better protect workers of all types, those who are linked in some lasting way to employers, those who are self-employed, those who operate in the gig economy. And a lot of these realizations came, I believe, from our experience with COVID. And the fact that during COVID, we as a government had to move quickly to make sure that we were protecting in the moment those who were going to immediately lose their income because of the fact that we had to stop in place. We had to freeze. Businesses were not operating, people were not able to spend and earn. And so the benefits that we were able to develop to self-employed people, in particular in cases where people had not been previously registered for national insurance, this is a responsive and dynamic way of governing. You are led by the immediacy of the moment, and you are equally led by the history, by the unfinished work, by the unfinished mandate of the area in question, this being protection of workers and their wages. And this work all hangs together. But even further to that, the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, who spoke earlier, made important references, I believe, to what it really means to be able to protect wages and to protect income. And he made reference to the notion, to which I'll return later, that the kind of training and access to information that will allow people to strengthen and improve and increase their wages and their income is perhaps something that we should continue to contemplate, and that we do as a government. That was contemplated, sir, in the BEST program that also was put together during COVID. The Barbados Employment and Sustainable Transformation Plan that targeted the tourism sector, sir, sought to provide incentives to those companies in the sector that would be able to green their operations. So for example, to in some way increase its reliance on renewable energy and energy efficiency, that were able to bring digital transformation to bear on their operations, and also importantly, that would be able to engage in the upskilling of those who work in their employ. And so, sir, this tradition or this approach to putting together legislation and measures in different places, in different ministries across government that mutually support people's capacity to earn, that mutually support people's livelihoods. And sir, I wouldn't have the time to go into all of the kinds of measures and pieces of legislation that we have brought that all work together in order to do this. And so this protection of wages bill, sir, is a part of that approach, a part of that ethos, and a part of that belief of this government in putting workers, we are all workers, in a better position, in a stronger position to continue to support their families and their communities, and to also be able to contribute to intergenerational wealth of those who will come later. And it is on this matter of intergenerational wealth, Mr. Speaker, that I want to spend a minute or two. Sir, I support the aspects of the legislation that relate to measures like not being able to charge interest on advances. You know, we were reminded recently that the work is not over for basic, decent conditions for workers. And sometimes we bring legislation and we engage in enforcement, and we feel that we occupy a tradition and an approach to dignity. And then we are reminded that perhaps not all of us do. And so the events of recent days and weeks that served as a reminder that we did not wish to have, but that perhaps was necessary, that there's still work to do to make sure that workers from wherever they come in this country are treated with dignity and respect in their living conditions and otherwise. And that remains critical. But sir, there is another frontier that we also have to conquer with respect to the protection of wages and income and livelihoods. And there are certain models, wage models of employment, wage-based models of employment, and there are certain ways in which we engage work and workers that in themselves contribute to economic insecurity. One of the reasons that so many of us stood in support of the portability of benefits resolution that I believe is already in action in terms of being able to set up a framework for its implementation. One of the reasons so many of us stood in support of that is that there are still too many people whose employment and whose way of earning an income leave them outside of other markets. They are not able, in some cases, to get a pay slip because they're told, well, you work for me on a part-time basis. You work on a gig basis. I am not your employer. I do not have any commitment to certify to anyone how much money you make or do not make. I don't know what else you're doing when the day comes. These are some of the things that workers hear when they seek to approach a financial institution and simply to certify that they earn a certain income in this particular place. I do not know what the difficulty could be with being able to certify that you pay a person a certain amount on a particular schedule. But there are some models of employment and there are some approaches to employment that do leave workers outside of credit markets and outside of other types of economic activity that mean that they are destined, that they are doomed to continue in a cycle in which they cannot earn real wealth for themselves and their families. And so that portability of benefits framework that will say to people, these are the conditions under which you can certify that a person works with, for, on your premises, on your project, under these conditions, for this wage, for this duration. These kinds of things are important. And also go to the idea and to the issue of protection of wages. But as the member for St. Thomas, who spoke before me, also intimated, while we talk about protection of wages, on the one hand, the conversation must always be similarly about the expansion of wealth. Protection of wages, but also expansion of wealth. I believe that in a post-colonial Caribbean, and sometimes I even hesitate to say post in that post-colonial, because there seems to be such an attachment to the plantation system in our economics. And when I say our economics, I mean not at the level of the state, but at the national level in some ways. But, sir, a wage-based system where all you are ever doing is getting a salary and making a wage and spending on basic needs, which some people must do because their wages can only go as far as their basic needs. That is not an economic model for the future. That is not an economic model for the future. And we are not in anything unless we can develop business models where employees can invest in the company with which they work and or in the products that that company is generating. Sir, it has been done in this country. It exists in this country today. And those good employer citizens who take the time not just to be able to work on things like a living wage. I know of one company that took the time to figure out, well, what really, I can choose to stay at the minimum wage as legislated, or I can choose to take my own minimum wage up to a level which I feel will give my employers the best chance at success. I know of at least one company that did that work and consulted with their employees to understand what will it really take for you to have a living wage, and pitch their minimum wage, their lowest wage in the company at that level. I know of a company that set up its structure, its shareholding structure, such that every employee was eligible to be able to purchase shares in the company. And so, sir, from protection of wages, and I'm not just talking about legislation because not everything can be legislated, but in our tripartite system of governance that includes the private sector, there is scope to not just look at protection of wages, but at expansion of wealth. and how we structure companies to include workers in ownership. So we're not in anything without ownership. We are not in anything in terms of expanding wealth for Barbadians if we are not talking about their ownership of assets, their stake in companies, their investment. And so similarly, I know that there's a conversation ongoing, and forgive me if I feel it has been ongoing a little bit too long, but some things have to evolve. And I think this is one that is evolving. But I know that we're in discussions with certain financial institutions, including the credit union, which may be one of the better placed and the better oriented to be able to be able to realize this, but to be able to develop instruments for people's broad investment. And when we talk about economic enfranchisement, I do not want us, and I cannot participate in a reality in which we use that term too loosely. We have to be able to pinpoint the instruments. Where can people invest? Through what fund at the credit union can people invest for a return for an ownership stake in some asset, whether in the private sector or in the public sector? And colleagues in here will get tired of hearing me return to this idea. And admittedly, as I said on the last occasion when I raised it, I'm talking to myself and to the member for Christchurch East Central, because this is a part of our mandate. I cannot sleep at night if I allow myself to go from this place, whenever that is. Do not anticipate that it should be too soon. But if I allow myself to go from this place without being able to work with private sector and financial institutions on being able to help develop those models, because we can't just in 2026 be talking about protection of wages and not be talking about the expansion of wealth. But I also think, sir, that the protection of wages conversation goes further. I believe that it is at clause 16 that there's reference made to where an employee can be paid. The physical location at which an employee can be paid, and I spoke to the member for St. Peter about this curiosity of the law, really, which I imagine is left back from a time before wages not to be paid on certain premises, and the stipulation that no employer shall pay wages to an employee at or within a retail shop or premises at which spirits, wine, beer, or fermented liquor is offered for sale, or premises used for entertainment or gambling unless the employer owns or occupies and the employer is employed at the retail shop or premises. It seems to me, sir, that it is a different kind of protection of wages. And it is seeking to protect the employee from her or himself. It is a curiosity of the legislation, I think. And I think it is one that is left back from a time when the state was quite paternalistic, quite protective in saying, well, I don't know what enticements you will meet when you turn around with this money, and so I want to protect you and your family from those vices that are right there in front of you. So you get paid and you turn left and you see a Johnny Walker, and you may not be able to resist. Some may find it is a little paternalistic for the state, except that some of us know that we see job sites on a Friday evening where that member of the family who is responsible for some of the expenditure of those wages in the care of the family finds themselves on the job site to protect those wages. I'm going to explain myself. There is a practice that I have known since I was a little girl, where the member of the household that has an interest in those wages, because she or he, often she, will have to spend those wages on the care and the maintenance of the household, finds themselves on a Friday afternoon on the job site to protect the wages. That's what it is. That's protection of wages too. Because they want to make sure, I raise this not in jocularity, sir, but I raise this to say that what that individual is doing is the same thing that this legislation is seeking to do. Which is to say, there are certain vices that may intervene before the wages get into the household. And so let me make sure that those vices don't intervene, because the burden is on me as the primary caregiver of this house to be able to use those wages in the interest and the maintenance of the members of the household. You don't know why some of the male members of this chamber are looking at me like they don't know what you're talking about. We know that this happens, and probably should. But I raise this, sir, only to say that there are other protections. We go so far as to seek to protect employers' wages from vice, employees' wages from vice. But considering the legislation fully, I also think that there are other areas in which people's income can be safeguarded. And I think, sir, of the many times as a member of parliament, as a representative of the people of St. Michael South Central, that I am called on to make representation for them with respect to matters like arrears on a water bill. Arrears on a water bill that have accumulated because of a leak that went undetected. And one of the things that I have often wondered is, to what extent can a utility that sees unusual usage, that sees an unusual spike in usage, especially in cases where this person is an elderly person who lives alone, where it is a small family, to what extent does that agency have a responsibility to flag that usage in order to protect that individual's income from having to be spent wholly on settling arrears that they did not contemplate? That is protection of wages, sir. It is a matter that I believe we as a government will explore with the companies that are related. Because I've always said that, and we know that it happens, for example, with telephones. I don't know if any of us in here have ever been abroad and lost service because you didn't put in a decent roaming plan and your bill ran up and your credit limit expired and you were cut off. And your service was cut off as a protective measure for you and for the company. Because the company considers, actually, if I let your bill keep going up, the odds that I am going to be able to recover these monies are low. And so there are other ways apart from legislation, sir. There are other ways apart from bringing bills that seek to enforce. There are other things we can do to be able to protect people's income in cases where they are not well placed to be able to do it themselves. And I don't see why we can't have a trigger system that says, look, this looks strange to me. This usage this does not match the trend, stop and let's find out what's going on here, because you're either going to spend the time as customer service with the person then, or you're going to spend the time as customer service when the person comes in and has to make a repayment plan, and guess what? Probably can't meet the terms of the repayment plan anyway. There are other kinds of ways, sir, beyond legislation in which we need to look at protection of wages. I know, sir, that there are those with respect to the bill binding the state that will talk about government's own record with respect to the payment of wages. And I know, and I say this for the benefit of those who have sent me messages asking if I was going to speak at this debate, but I know that there's work to be done, and I know the Honourable Member for St. Philip South? West? That's why you should make sure that you seek advice in the right place. The Honourable Member for St. Philip West is working very hard. Is working very hard on the HR management information system that will give her and the ministry and all of government the wherewithal to make sure that authorities are sent and received in such a way that people within government are paid in a timely way. I would not ever seek to preempt the work, the announcements, the utterances of the Honourable Member who has that ministerial responsibility, but I am aware that that work is ongoing because government is not left out of this legislation. Government, as the Honourable Member for St. Peter has suggested, has a responsibility to lead from in front, to lead by example in making sure that the people in the employ of government also have the wherewithal to support themselves and their families in a timely way. I say to team members all the time when this subject comes up, if I am being paid and I know with confidence that my salary will be where I expect it to be at a certain time, none of us should be able to sleep well if that is not the case for others with whom we work. You come work and see the people every day. They are working and you know that they're working, and in fact their work is benefiting your work. And so we are never a government, sir, that will come here and say that we have met perfection on every count, but certainly that we are working towards the systems that are going to put people in a better position to choose the lives that they want to live. Finally, sir, I always return to the question of protection with productivity. And I cannot leave aside the question of productivity, and I cannot leave aside the question of rights with responsibility, because I think that Barbados is at a place in our development where the responsibility side of the equation must be strengthened for all of us, including those of us in this honourable place. And so we, as legislators, as lawmakers, we spend a lot of time on the rights, as we should. We are here to ensure and to secure the rights of people from all groups across society. But we also, as a society, because it is not our job to lecture anybody, but we collectively, as Barbadians, must also consider our responsibility. The Honourable Member for St. Thomas, whose intervention I liked very much, talked about the digital skills gap and the right to training. But, sir, as we discuss this legislation, we all have to take ownership and accountability for protection of our income. My mother used to say this thing all the time, where when one of us three girls would complain about somebody not doing something on our behalf, she would say, you better get up and see about yourself. And of course, the notion behind that is, well, nobody's coming to save you. There's a responsibility for other people to protect you, and they should fulfill that responsibility. But you I, the person, also have a responsibility to take ownership and accountability to the extent that I can for those things that are in my influence and in my capacity to effect to do that. And so as the member for St. Thomas talked about the right to training, I also reflected on the extent to which the penetration of those digital skills and improving that penetration and strengthening those skills must also come alongside a willingness to participate in the technology. So that, for example, if there is an opportunity provided by an employer to use an app, to use a piece of easily accessed technology, to be able to log your hours, to be able to share information that is material to protecting your wages and to making sure that that employer knows how many hours you worked, that you were in the place of work at the time they said, then there has to be a willingness to engage. As a former Minister of Technology, I very much understand and support the need to bring everybody along, and that not everybody will come along at the same time. This legislation bears that out, rightly so. I also believe that those of us with the capacity to engage with technology, we live in 2026, and sometimes I wonder whether we are grateful for that reality. The reality of living in 2026 means that there are certain things that are now at our fingertips that were not at the fingertips of our foreparents. Some of our foreparents had to go and argue with employers who wanted to withhold their wages, who did not want to be able to prove that they had worked the hours that they had worked, and wanted to short pay them and underpay them. And now we live in a 2026 where you can pick up your phone and have an app that says all I have to do is hit I here, and when I leave, all I have to do is hit I gone. And we fight it with ourselves to be able to say, well, I ain't gonna do that. I don't have to do that. That is true. There's very little that you have to do. But do we want to be right, or do we want to be happy? Sometimes I think that we focus a lot on wanting to be right. We don't have to engage with this thing because we are told we don't have to. Do we evaluate the extent to which it will make our lives easier and give us greater ownership of what happens to us? That is a question that perhaps we should ask ourselves. That is not for a government to do. That is for all of us to do. To be able to say, look, in this contract that I have with this employer, in this contract that I have with my country, because as workers, you know, sometimes we only see as far as the person that is giving us the envelope. And we don't see past the person that's giving us the envelope to see the Barbados to which we are contributing. So in this contract that I have, am I fulfilling, as I expect my rights, am I fulfilling my responsibilities? Am I showing up fit and ready to work and honest about my capacity to work? Am I engaging with the tools that will allow me to be a better worker? Am I engaging with the tools that will allow me to know what wage I should expect? I do not believe that we should excuse this notion. I've spoken with people who say to me, I ask them, but when they come and complain about a particular matter with respect to work, I said, but who is the person that you're working for? They cannot tell me the name of the person, the name of the supervisor, the name of the company. There's a certain extent to which we have to take ownership of our destiny. And I'm so proud to live in a Barbados where such priority is given to the rights of workers. This, I will tell you, we all know that there are parts of the world that only dream of a framework like this that protects people, only dream of having labor officers that fight every day to protect the rights of workers. In order to do justice to that hard work, from people alive today and people who are long dead, we have a responsibility too, to show up in our own lives and make sure that we are protecting ourselves to the extent that we have been given the capacity so to do. And so, sir, I commend this legislation. I feel quite proud, and that pride is one that relates to the culture of accountability and the culture of protection and the culture of human rights that I am a part of as a Barbadian. I feel quite proud to be a part of a parliament that continues to strengthen that. And with those few words, sir, I thank you for hearing me.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 20 to 6.
The question is that this Honourable Chamber be suspended until 20 minutes to 6. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until 20 minutes to 6.